Hey guys, welcome to the channel, and I realized that we haven't talked about the Sonos Ray versus the Sonos Beam, even though we've had both for quite a while now. So today we're going to talk about it and we will compare the two of them and see which one is worth the money. We will also change the format of this review slightly. Let's see whether you like it. Let's go. So I hope you have enjoyed and found the new format useful. It took me quite a while to come up with it. I kind of like it. I just think that it will mean that I talk a lot less. So let me know what you think down in the video comment section down below. So having covered most of those points in the charts which I have presented earlier, I will just skip to the very important points when comparing these two soundbars. Now, obviously, the most important thing is actually price. I did not use price as a factor in my comparison because different people assign different value to price. I mean, $170 difference between the $279 Sonos Ray and the $449 Sonos Beam Gen 2 may not mean much to you, but it might mean more to others. So while the scores that I've assigned to the various functions, such as placement, ease, or sound formats, connectivity, the soundstage, the bass, the mid-range, the treble, they are all relative, meaning to say I'm comparing the two. Now, give me a bit of chance to try to enhance those a little bit. So moving forward, I might be able to come out with a standardized set of tests. But for today, this is my first attempt at it. And while the Sonos Ray has scored 64 versus the Sonos Beam Gen 2 scoring 74%, you have to take note that it doesn't factor in price as a consideration, because when you factor in price, you are going to be paying 60% less actually for the Sonos Ray, because the Sonos Beam Gen 2 costs $449 and this costs $279. Then it changes the game a little bit. It's going to push up the score for the Sonos Ray because you're getting more value out of it. So while the $170 difference or the 60% difference in price may not matter to some, it will matter to others, and that will change the equation. So with price out of the way, then we will talk about the more important differences, because most of the differences I've already covered in the clip up front. So the most important thing to note out of the Sonos Ray is that it doesn't accept an HDMI eARC input. It uses optical connection. So your TV needs to have optical connection before you can use this soundbar. Of course, you can use the soundbar as a soundbar to stream your music, and it will still be fine. You can also use AirPlay too. So if you're using iOS devices, including the Mac OS X devices, you can also use this, although there will be a slight lag if you are trying to pair it with video. And the drivers are all arranged to face forward, so you can actually put it in very tight spaces without a need for left and right space between this and the cabinet that you're going to be putting it in. And as for the Sonos Beam Gen 2, The Sonos Beam Gen 2 actually comes with a full bandwidth HDMI eARC port. So there is a HDMI 2.0 port which supports full lossless Dolby Atmos. So you're going to get full uncompressed Dolby Atmos sound when you pair it with an eARC capable TV. Well, your TV also kind of have to support Atmos to get the best result and to ensure that you will always get the best sound quality from the Sonos Beam Gen 2. So the Sonos Beam Gen 2 is an update to the previous Sonos Beam Gen 1, which they didn't call it Gen 1 at that point in time, but that doesn't support Atmos. The Beam Gen 2 supports Atmos. So when you are considering between the two, do consider whether you need the Dolby Atmos sound system or not. Otherwise, this will be $170 more for not doing much else. Actually, I can't say that it's not doing much else because that brings us to the next point, the sound quality. Now, I'm playing and I'm actually going to be testing. I recorded 2 clips for each of these soundbar, which I'll put up at the end of the video, and you can hear for yourself at 50% volume how these two are going to sound like when it's handling music and when it's handling movie formats. Both the sound clips are Dolby full lossless Atmos capable sound clips, so you should be able to hear it in its full glory. And I've recorded it using a VR microphone which captures binaural audio. I didn't put it very far away, just about a foot and a half away from the soundbar, so that you'll be able to capture more sound and less noise. I hope that helps you reach a buying decision. If you're out here just to get to the point where you can hear how these two sound like against each other, then visit the chapter markers down below. I will link you there right away. We are at the point of sound, and if we want to compare these two soundbars, there are a few factors which I've listed in my list earlier. There are a few factors that we want to consider. First is the Soundstage, and the next three is the bass, the mid-range, and the treble. Now, this is where the two soundbar differs very, very significantly. So we're done talking about the physical aspect, the deployment constraints, the ports that we have, right? So we're talking about now the sound and what you're going to be getting for your money. As with a lot of my videos, I do a lot of frequency response sweep, and this video is no exception. So what I'm going to be pulling up will be the definitive frequency response curves for both the Sonos Ray as well as the Sonos Beam Gen 2. Now, first up, I'm pulling up the green curve, and this green curve here is actually for the Sonos Ray. The Sonos Ray on its own, when you look at the green curve, it doesn't say much. Okay, so it goes all the way from 20 Hertz all the way up to 20 kilohertz. And at 20 kilohertz, that represents the treble. 20 hertz is the bass response, or the low tens of hertz. And somewhere between 100 hertz or up to 3 kilohertz, that is the mid-range response. So if you look at the green curve right up here for the Sonos Ray, you'll think that, okay, maybe the bass response isn't that great. The mid-range seems to be propped up and significantly represented, but the treble sees a deep valley dive all the way from maybe even starting from 2 kilohertz. So in a way, I don't think the treble is actually that great. So I've given the bass, the mid-range, and the treble rating earlier, and why I think the mid-range stands up is simply because of how well it holds up in the mid-range. Now I'm going to pull up another curve here. Okay, and yep, this red color curve here actually is the frequency response sweep for the Sonos Beam Gen 2. And you will see, right, what I mean when I gave those ratings. So those ratings, while they are relative and I'm still a little bit new at this ratings game, they do represent something. They do tell a story in that the Sonos Beam will actually do well in the bass and the treble department, and the Sonos Ray actually does very well in the mid-range department. So this chart here, it actually substantiates those points. So I'm not just throwing numbers out there in a random fashion. I'm not rating them randomly. I'm actually really going into it, right? There are some subjective ones, of course, like Soundstage, which is hard to actually gauge and put a number to, but that's why I have recorded those tests at the end of the video where you can judge for yourself what do you think the Soundstage is. Now, I'm going to be talking about the Sonos Ray's mid-range, right? If you look at the mid-range, the green bar for the Sonos Ray actually is doing a lot better than the red bar in the mid-range from about 100 Hz all the way to about even 3 kilohertz, right? You see that the Sonos Ray actually projects a very sweet and relatively flat mid-range, right? There is a hum there, short hum at about 100 Hz, 150 Hz or so. Now, what this means is that the Sonos Ray is actually capable of putting out pretty good mid-range. And this will really help if you are into upgrading the TV sound for dialogue, right? Because mid-range is where a lot of dialogue lives in. And if this does a good job in the mid-range, you will be able to hear dialogue a lot clearer. And this is what I have been experiencing when I have been doing my testing over the last couple of weeks. So the mid-range comes through very clearly if you're watching TV, if you're watching drama series and where there's a lot of dialogue happening, it really, really shines through, especially news and sports. So you want to upgrade your TV for better dialogue, for better sound, this Sonos Ray is probably the soundbar to go for as opposed to the Sonos Beam. Now, the Sonos Beam, where it does well, right? If you look at the rate curve here, the bass department, it definitely does better. Below 100 Hz, there is no contest. The Sonos Beam Gen 2 actually does a lot better, as you can see from the difference here. In the mid-range, like I have mentioned, it does pale in comparison to what the Sonos Ray is actually capable of putting out. If you look at the range between 100 Hz all the way up to 3 kHz, the Sonos Ray is actually capable of putting up more mid-range output than the Sonos Beam itself. And it comes through and it shows, because if you have some difficulties hearing dialogue in the movies when you are running the Sonos Beam Gen 2, this is probably the definitive reason why that happens. Of course, you can actually turn on dialogue clarity, voice enhancement. I can't remember what they call it. I don't use that because I want to hear sound in its original form. But what is remarkable here is that if you look at how flat the entire curve is for the Sonos Beam Gen 2, all the way from 60 Hz right up to almost 17, 18 kilohertz, where there is a dip for the Sonos Ray when it goes past beyond 3 kilohertz. You see that the Sonos Beam Gen 2 actually keeps it up and keeps it quite flat, tailing off only after about 9 kilohertz or so, and gradually rolling off till about 17 kilohertz. So the Sonos Beam Gen 2 would then be great for things like movies where you need more bass effects and where there are a lot of sound effects that entails a higher frequency, and there's a need for directivity of sound where it tries to create that soundstage. Now, in terms of soundstage, now that I'm touching on it, the Sonos Beam Gen 2 has a much wider soundstage. There are sidewards firing speaker cones, and they fire 45 degrees either to the left or the right. Actually, to the left and the right. And as opposed to the Sonos Ray, where the 4 cones are all firing forward, you will hear a much more convincing surround sound effect from the Sonos Beam Gen 2. Now again, soundstage is probably hard to convince you just through words. I'm leaving you with these 4 videos, right? I have recorded 2 video clips, right, for each of the Sonos Ray and the Sonos Beam Gen 2. So I'll leave it to you to decide for yourself how the distinction between the Sonos Ray and the Sonos Beam Gen 2 will matter to you for the difference in the price that you're paying. I hope you have enjoyed today's video. If you found this video useful, please consider leaving a like, or better still, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to try this. I haven't done this before. Yeah, subscribe to the channel. Now I'm going to pop up a QR code here as well. So this QR code will link you to my Patreon account. So if you have found this channel information useful, you have found this video useful, I'll appreciate if you could leave a small tip and, basically contribute to my coffee fund. Buy me a coffee. And for all the work that I put in, I hope you have benefited and gained something out of it. And I will see you in the next video. Meanwhile, enjoy the video clips.
This is Dolby Atmos, the world's first object-based cinematic audio. With powerful moving audio that transcends from channels to moving around you with pinpoint accuracy. Whether the soundscape sets the mood of a scene,
Let's go!
or captures the full extent
Do you want to know my secret?
of nature's fury. This is Dolby Atmos, the world's first object-based cinematic audio. With powerful moving audio that transcends from channels to moving around you with pinpoint accuracy. Whether the soundscape sets the mood of a scene,
Come on, you guys, let's go!
or captures the full extent
Do you want to know my secret?
of nature's fury.